Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the IIH for giving me the opportunity to present on the topic of novel catchment modelling methods to support Irish Water's lead mitigation programme. So the Irish government has a national strategy to reduce the exposure to lead in drinking water, and Irish Water has developed a lead mitigation plan. When water leaves Irish water treatment plants, it is lead-free. However, when water passes through lead pipes and fittings, lead can dissolve into it. Irish Water have replaced lead public water mains in Ireland, but lead plumbing was widely used in houses built before the 1980s. And it's estimated that there's 180,000 homes in Ireland, together with public buildings and business premises over 40 years old, that may have lead plumbing. There's been a limited uptake in the government grant scheme for private side lead replacement, and as such, until the amount of lead services can be reduced, Irish Water proposed to treat the affected water supplies with orthophosphate, which is an internationally accepted method for the treatment of this issue. Orthophosphate creates a coating on the internal of the pipe, which prevents lead dissolution. So orthophosphate treatment is completed at the treatment plant prior to the network distribution, and the treatment concentrations typically range from 0.5 to 1.2 milligrams of phosphate as orthophosphate. There's no potential impact to human health from the orthophosphate itself. Phosphorus is added in numerous foodstuffs at much higher concentrations, but the lead is certainly a potential impact, particularly for pregnant women, babies, and young children. So because of the potential impact on the aquatic environment due to mains leakage and discharge at wastewater treatment plants and septic tanks, this has been assessed on a risk-based method. So the environmental assessment methodology, the EAM, as we've come to call it, is a GIS Excel-based screening tool that was developed based on the EPA Pathways Project characterization tool. The attenuation factors in this are based on Irish research. The model tracks orthophosphate as it leaves the treatment plant through the entire distribution network, accounting for homes that are treated with orthophosphate, and also areas that are not on the distribution network. Groundwater pathways are considered in detail in the image below here, where you can see that the potential leakage rates from the water supply main in the trench are tracked through various pathways. So some of these pathways will percolate down into a deeper pathway in the bedrock, whereas others in, say, low permeability subsoils will flow at near surface preferential pathways. This method takes account of rejected recharge by applying the recharge caps defined by the GSI, and attenuation factors are applied along the pathways. So ultimately, the method tracks the flow to the receiving water body, be that a lake, a transitional water body, coastal, and a simulative capacity assessment is then completed at the end to determine whether or not the increase in orthophosphate concentration is discernible or would have any impact on the Water Framework Directive objectives for the water body. So a pilot project was commenced in Limerick. Treatment there commenced in December 2016. And in advance of that, there was 7 boreholes drilled there, nested boreholes, including up to 2 or 3 sampling depths per borehole. And these were drilled to provide baseline data for the city, but also operational data to help validate the EAM model to determine whether we're seeing orthophosphate leakage in groundwater. The drilling itself helped provide an improved conceptual model for the city, where we see the water mains positioned in the made ground, percolating through into the subsoil, through the unsaturated zone, and ultimately down into the bedrock, where then groundwater flows through the horizontal pathway towards the main rivers in the area, including the Shannon and the Dordoyle River. So groundwater concentrations have remained below model predictions 4 years after the treatment commenced. And here you can see the data from the boreholes. And as I say, this includes subsoil boreholes and bedrock boreholes. There are occasional spikes at one of the sites, which we can correlate to that site being located very close to the Shannon on Arthur's Quay. And we have this bank storage effect where when the river is at high levels, surface water influences the groundwater quality in the borehole. So it's not quite reflective of the groundwater coming from up gradient. But excluding those issues, we can see that there's no discernible trend of orthophosphate increasing throughout the city, even 4 years after this. Similarly, for the surface water, monitoring points here are kind of up and down gradient of the city. In the Shannon, again, show no discernible trend in orthophosphate after the 4 years of treatment. So for Dublin and Galway, we've moved to a further characterization. This is because the EAM contains numerous highly conservative assumptions. And for the scale and complexity of these water supply zones, additional characterization was needed. So for groundwater, that included developing a 3D groundwater flow model and transport model, which allows more realistic representation of the flow and transport processes. So the further characterization process started with a scoping study to see, was it even viable to develop a groundwater model for these areas? Did we have enough data? Could we achieve the model resolution we wanted? And how big was the model domain going to be? So we then moved on to develop the groundwater model for these two cities, as it was determined it was viable. And we did that with the available data. But this then allowed us to identify areas where we needed further calibration. And that helped us to identify locations for future drilling. So we developed a groundwater monitoring network for the two cities. And the idea is there that that will provide us with good quality model calibration data. And also, when we're doing that drilling, we will then collect subsoils of the made ground and samples of subsoil and made ground to allow us to complete sorption analysis to determine how much sorption will occur in the different soil types we see in these urban environments. And also, the boreholes will then provide us with the baseline and operational groundwater quality data. So in Dublin, we had an early consultation with the Geological Survey of Ireland, and they were able to provide us with their data set of the geotechnical boreholes, which we were able to import into the iMod software we were using for the ground model development. I can fully recommend that. It's actually open source groundwater modeling software, but very powerful in terms of its 3D visualization capabilities. What we did find was while there was a good bit of variation in terms of the quality of borehole logging, because these are typically records that are sent in by drillers, and each will have their own different quality of records. But we did see overall general trends can be observed here throughout the record. We did look at other Dublin 3D models. For example, the GSI have their own 3D quaternary model. ARP had developed a 3D ground model for the Dublin port area. And there are some PhD theses looking at glacial channels in the centre of Dublin. So we did review this data, but essentially the spatial resolution of some of that might have either been too fine for what we wanted or too coarse in the situation with the GSI model. So this presents a little visualization of the iMod software in action. So you can see we have our layers and we can peel back the layers there and then zoom in and have a look at the boreholes. And the gray here you can see is the made ground, which is one of the key things we wanted to see. How does that vary across the city? Because while we have a good sense of it from site to site, there's not quite any information on how that varies at a more regional scale. So the groundwater modeling was completed. Once we had the ground model set up in IMOD, we then were able to bring that into Groundwater Vistas, which is a fairly standard groundwater modeling software. And we were modeling groundwater flow with ModFlow and groundwater transport with MT3D. So the flow model was calibrated with available data. This is in terms of groundwater levels, with in-house data that we had from ARP on various different projects. And while you can see here the model calibration points are shown in yellow, we get a reasonable calibration for this initial calibration. There are gaps spatially, and also some of this data will have been from different periods, from different projects, so not all the same antecedent conditions. And also we completed groundwater flow calibration. There's 3 quarries in the city in the model domain, and we were able to calibrate how much the model predicted groundwater inflows to those quarries compared to what's the quarries have permitting in terms of their dewatering. So we, in terms of the solute transport then, the initial modeling was using literature values for sorption. So this allowed us to then target areas where we needed improved calibration, or where we were getting values that we felt were not representative, and that helped us define the borehole locations. So this presents a visualization again from IMOD showing the particle tracking, and what it's showing here is a view through the Liffey Valley, and you can see the rapid groundwater flow through the shallow made ground and subsoil and gravel layers, and then a slower flow path through the deeper bedrock layers. And this helped us visualize and understand the different dynamics going on within that section. So for Galway, it was felt the need here was very much so driven by the variation in the hydrogeological setting. So whereas Dublin is a calc limestone, locally important aquifer, muddy limestone, and Limerick is more of a Walsall type limestone. In Galway, we get 2 very different settings. On the east of the city, we have the karst limestone, which is a regionally important karst aquifer, prone to karstification with swallow holes, springs, which you can see marked here on the map. And on the west of the city, we have the granite, and poorly productive aquifer, much higher drainage density, much shallower water table. So Galway presented us with challenges that allowed us then to ensure we had a good representation across a good wide range of hydrogeological environments. So as I was saying, in the Galway model, on the west of the city, we can see our conceptual model here that we have somewhat thin subsoils with quite a high drainage density, a lot of streams, and quite a shallow water table linked into those because of the lower permeability of the bedrock. Whereas on the eastern side, with the karst, we have a very flat hydraulic gradient. We have dry valleys, and so much higher permeability in the bedrock. Also in Galway, we get paleo channels in the karst. So site investigation from the Galway Bypass project helped inform this, where we were seeing boreholes in the city with 60 meters of low permeability clay infill in the karst. And these have been mapped out by Les Brown and others with some research on those on the back of the N6 project. And we were able to include those in the model, and also then we were able to use the groundwater level data from the N6 project to provide calibration for Galway. So Galway, the borehole drilling has commenced, and we've selected the 12 locations there. The drilling methodology was rotary coring, which provided excellent cores here, as you can see, and we can see the variation from the limestone here in the east through some metagabbro in the center, and the granite out on the west. So we had the 12 locations. 7 of those included a nested borehole, where we had a shallower borehole in the subsoil, but 5 of the locations, the subsoil was too thin to include a borehole. And the soil sampling was collected then for absorption testing. We were also able to complete falling head tests to estimate permeability for the boreholes. So each of the boreholes in the bedrock and the subsoil are installed with a water level logger, and the logger is actually a combined level, temperature, and conductivity logger. So this produces really high quality data. One of the learnings from Limerick was that influence of either surface water or leaky sewers that could give false positives in terms of the elevated phosphorus after storm events, which could come from wastewater as opposed to the cleaner drinking water leakage from water mains. So each of the boreholes have been installed with these. So Archwater recently purchased 48 of these loggers, and they come with direct read cables so that the loggers don't need to be taken out every time. And we come with the little data grabber unit that we have here. We connect directly into the direct read cables, and we're able to download the data. It's also good because we can then change the frequency of the readings if we want. And here's where we were doing the falling head tests. So we were at hourly frequency, and then for the head test, we were able to change the recording frequency to every 2 minutes, or sorry, every 2 seconds, and inject the slug of water, and you can see the water level come up here and then drop off again. And we knew then that once we had the stabilization, we could either repeat the slug test or revert back to hourly monitoring. So we connect into this with the Bluetooth, and so we can see that live data during the test on the mobile phone. So really good. The boreholes haven't been installed with telemetry. They're actually completed as flush covers. You would pass by them if you walked in the area, and that's really the idea, that they're not susceptible to vandalism, and that they're not prone to getting knocked over when the local authority come to cut the grass. So we will be going to the sites to collect the water quality samples, so the loggers can be downloaded then. So we didn't feel there was a need to include telemetry for these sites. The boreholes are installed with dedicated well caps, again for secure installation, and so that direct read cables can be downloaded. In terms of the absorption analysis, we're just starting to get back this data now, and it's really fascinating. The soil sampling, so we've completed essentially a spiked analysis where the soil samples are mixed with an orthophosphate solution at different concentrations, and they're mixed and then analyzed to see how much absorption has occurred. And ultimately, what we're trying to determine is which is the best way of representing the absorption. And there's different methods in the literature, the Freundlich and isotherm, which, looking at different parts of the literature, different sites match different relationships between the sorbed and solute concentrations. So having this data will help us to build that understanding, so that we can apply the actual correct coefficients in the models. So in Dublin, these are due for drilling in the next quarter. And there's 12 monitoring locations as seen there. And the only difference here is we have included for sampling points in the made ground, which in Dublin can be quite thick. So that's really it. In summary, Irish Water, the lead mitigation plan includes orthophosphate treatment for water supplies. Potential impact on P indicative quality in receiving waters has been assessed using an environmental assessment methodology to ensure orthophosphate dosing is compatible with the achievement of WFD objectives. Limerick Monitoring has provided validation for the EAM approach and confirmed it is conservative. Further characterization in Dublin and Galway, including 3D groundwater flow and transport modelling, groundwater monitoring network development, and laboratory soil analysis to determine absorption coefficients. Monitoring network now provides opportunity for improved understanding of hydrogeology in Ireland, and there's been ongoing consultation with GSI, EPA, and DCC. And in fact, we hope that the long term, the monitoring network will be taken in care by those. And just like to acknowledge Sean McGee, Anita Layden, Ronan Kane, and Brian Deegan in Irish Water, who are the core team that have been helping us all along. Also, we're partnered very closely with Ryan Hanley on this, and we've had quite a large team in Ireland working on this through the years. And so thank you to all that team for their continued support.